Hello, and welcome to our summer weather outlook. My name is Andrea Berg, and I will be your host today. I am joined by Stephen Davenport, one of our DTN weather risk communicators. We have Brad Nelson, also a solution engineer for risk communicator, and Arian Peast, one of our strategic product managers. Before we begin our webinar today, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. Everybody is on mute. We are recording this session, so if you have anybody in your organization that wants to also see this session, please feel free to pass this on. We will be sending out the recording within a few days after the conclusion of the webinar. And if you do have any questions at any time throughout the webinar, please go ahead and feel free to use the Q&A or the chat feature within the program. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Stephen.
Thank you, Andrea. I wonder if you are able to flip through the pages. There we are. And here are the housekeeping notes that Andrea was mentioning. So what are we going to do in this session? Well, let me introduce myself first. I'm Stephen Davenport, Long Range Weather Risk Communicator at DTN. So we're going to be looking through the highlights of last summer in the UK and in Europe, in fact, expected seasonal influences and analogues for the upcoming summer season, the model forecasts, our official summer season outlook, and then we'll close out with a panel discussion with Brad and Arian and any questions. So firstly, a review of the summer of 2022. On the whole, it was what some people will call a bit of a scorcher. Temperatures well above normal across pretty much the whole continent, including the UK and Ireland, as you can see in the reanalysis for June to August on the left there. Exceptions were parts of Southeast Europe around Turkey and less warmth at times in parts of the UK and Ireland. Cooler conditions overall in Scandinavia, but especially in August. Taking a closer look at the UK, June was more seasonal in places, but there was anomalous warmth across the eastern side of the UK, England, and across much of Scotland. Then in July and August, most of the UK saw above average temperatures, with the strongest anomaly still in the east during July and across the southern half of the UK in August, especially the far south. As far as rainfalls goes, following a rather dry spring, the summer had variable rainfall, not enough persistently falling in the same areas to alleviate what were very dry conditions across many parts of the continent. Greens and yellows here depicting below average rainfall, so parts of north, south, west and eastern Europe had only 50 to 70% of average rainfall. Some areas of Spain below 50% of normal rainfall. In the UK, the West, especially Western Scotland, had periodic rain in June, more confined to Northern Scotland in July, while much of the country was much drier than average, particularly southern and western areas of England. Some highlights from a rather memorable summer last year in the UK. In June, Wales and southern England had localized thunderstorms, downpours early in the month, some pretty torrential falls of rain. Through mid-month, further outbreaks, mainly in the south and east of England, and again in the south right at the end of the month. An unprecedented heat wave started around the 18th and 19th, impacting roads, airports, and other infrastructure. And then we had more heavy downpours developing later in the month. At the start of August, an Atlantic system brought some high rainfall totals to Wales, Cumbria, the West Highlands, but an extended dry, hot period followed that. Peak temperatures lower than in the July heat wave, but still got into the 30s Celsius. We even had some wildfires in the southeast, but the heat broke in middle of August with further strong thunderstorms developing. Across the rest of Europe, this is what the heat looked like through both the average temperatures and their ranking against previous years. A number of places saw their hottest summer on record, and Europe overall had its hottest summer ever recorded, previous hottest being the previous year, 2021. Temperatures got above 40 Celsius in places, most notably in France, Spain and Portugal. And Pinhão in Portugal reached 47 Celsius in July. Not a surprise then that droughts and wildfires became an issue. Just as in the UK, torrential rain and strong thunderstorms around in mid-August brought flooding in places and an end to that intense heat. Just a few pictures here of some of the impacts on Europe and a map of the drought alerts in July last year. Quick look at wind anomalies. The past couple of summers where wind power has been pretty poor across much of Northern Europe, especially in 2021. 2022 at least saw an uptick from Scotland across the North Sea to Scandinavia. Moving forward to this spring, March and April in the UK were rather cool in places, near seasonal at best. May was warmer compared to normal, except in some persistent nagging northeasterly winds in some eastern and southeast areas, bringing cooler air and a lot of cloud into the east and southeast. In the broader context across Europe, parts of the west were near seasonal through March, but heat built strongly across Eastern Europe. In April, Spain and Portugal saw a strong surge of heat, record-breaking heat in places, reaching 40 Celsius already in some locations. Compare that with the coolness across Central Europe, where it was cloudier and wetter. Then Spain itself and Portugal became much wetter in May. Some very heavy and persistent rainfall, bringing an end to the heat, with temperatures dropping substantially. So you can see the reason for that in the precipitation anomalies. Dry across Spain and Portugal in March, wet across much of Central, West and Northwest Europe, then very dry in Southwest Europe in April before the significant change in May when high pressure became established to the north. Low pressure systems were forced southwards to affect the Mediterranean, bringing copious rain and flooding. So can we expect anything remotely similar this year? Let's dive into the forecast and the background to the forecast. So what are the main seasonal drivers? The teleconnections, the large-scale atmospheric oceanic influences on the Northern Hemisphere's weather. Patterns of ocean temperatures can give us a decent clue, given that these change and evolve relatively slowly. Principal areas to look at here are the equatorial Pacific, the North Atlantic, where you can see a lot of anomalous warmth, and to a lesser extent, the North Pacific. So here are the main drivers. We've seen a change in the, since last year in the equatorial Pacific, where there was a La Nina episode in place for 2022, cooling of the equatorial Pacific. But now we've got the reverse with a developing El Nino as those waters steadily warm. Every bit of evidence is pointing towards El Nino, and we're expecting it to gain moderate strength by the end of summer, with further strengthening possible as we move into the autumn. One thing working against an even stronger El Nino event is a negative PDO phase that's persisted for the last 7-8 years. That's the large area of warm waters in the North Pacific, but surrounded by a horseshoe of cooler waters towards the coast and pulled towards the Central Pacific. In the Atlantic, we've got warm waters and a positive AMO, that's the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation, which we've also had for a good while now. This oceanic warmth tends to promote warmer than normal conditions in Western Europe. Here's the ENSO forecast, the El Nino Southern Oscillation, which you can see from model average is steadily rising into a strengthening El Nino. A couple of models are considerable outliers, which drop into neutral and then negative state, but the majority of the guidance is supporting El Nino development to a greater or lesser degree, which reflects the model average, the thicker red line here. So let's take a look at the analogs, the average weather conditions from years past that had similar ocean temperature patterns to this year's expectations. El Nino, the PDO, the AMO, and other drivers like the QBO and the Indian Ocean dipole, which should be moving to a positive phase, which can promote higher pressure near Western Europe. Added to that, we have some forecast adjustment depending how the pattern behaved during those years. Here are the weighted temperature analogs. There's quite decent consistency and agreement, which supports the climate model composite average on the right there, showing anomalous warmth across much of Europe. The model composite shows stronger anomalies, in fact, especially in Western Europe, but both suggesting a cooler pattern for the east. Rainfall is a bit more problematic. We have higher confidence in the temperature forecast than we do precipitation, but models are a lot wetter than the analogues across southern Europe and drier conditions in the UK, northern Europe, and southern Scandinavia have a little more confidence, given drier probabilities somewhat coincide. But the best agreement, highest confidence, is for a wetter summer in southeastern Europe. The second tool is the seasonal models, chiefly from the CFS V2 model and the European model at ECMWF, which simulate large-scale seasonal outlooks. So here are the CFS V2 outlooks. Temperatures on the left, precipitation on the right, indicating for much of Europe warmer than average conditions for each month and for the summer as a whole, but particularly in July. It's cool conditions for much of Scandinavia, Finland, Spain and Portugal in June compared with the other months. Southeast Europe, as we've already seen, looks cooler overall. And as far as rainfall is concerned, we have wet conditions modeled across southern Europe through the rest of June, also pushing across much of France, so maybe the north, then to a lesser extent in July and August. Northern Europe, conversely, dry in June, more variable in July, and then we've got a wetter looking August, especially in northwest Europe. ECMWF shows a similar pattern of extensive warmth, but more so than the CFS V2. Most notably, much warmer June for the Iberian Peninsula and Scandinavia, and less cool in southwest Europe. Otherwise, any differences are not as noticeable in July and August. Precipitation patterns depart more, with northwest Europe looking wetter than the CFS in June, but a bit drier in July. Southern Europe, not quite as wet in July, less wet in August, but the CFS increases precipitation in northwest Europe during August, as does the ECMWF. So how's the forecast compiled? Well, we take all these sources in mind. We look at climatology, narrow that down to the trends over the past decade, then relate this to the statistical analogues from the teleconnections and some of the seasonal computer models to create our final forecast solution. So on to the highlights of our forecast itself. With all that in mind, the broad pattern shows a lot of high pressure across Europe, or higher pressure than normal anyway. Spain shows a lack of that high pressure in June, which is consistent with the wetter June expected there and into the central Mediterranean. But pressure builds through the rest of the summer, commensurate with a drying trend in those areas. Conversely, pressure falls in the North Atlantic and Northwest Europe in July to a degree, and more especially in August, with indications of more low pressure influence into parts of Northern Europe as well into August. That would be a change to more unsettled and wetter weather. June forecast, looking at it on a week-to-week basis, shown here. There's that coolness in southwest Europe due to the enhanced rainfall and across parts of the Med and into southeast Europe. Cool as well across Scandinavia, except for the south, and into Finland and parts of northeast Europe and northwest Russia. These cool anomalies tend to moderate and shrink week by week through June, and elsewhere a lot of warm or very warm weather, although note that coolness along the east coast of England for this week at least, as northeasterly winds continue for a while. The month ahead rainfall looks like this, still very wet for a while across southwest and southern Europe, and dry across a lot of northern and eastern Europe before some of that rainfall shifts northwards mid-month. But northern Europe could be drier again by the end of June. Beyond that detail, here's the month-to-month seasonal forecast, starting off with temperatures, which, given the preponderance of anomalous high pressure we saw a few slides ago, are going to be widely above average through the summer. Each month individually should be above average across a large wedge of Europe, but we're expecting cooler conditions across the east, near seasonal or a bit below, with June likely to be the coolest. Early to midsummer could be hottest in Western Europe, with temperatures averaging a couple of degrees above normal in places, before August shows some moderation with chances of something cooler across the north as rainfall increases. Long-term trends also make warmer than summer normal more likely, and lower than average soil moisture conditions across a large swathe of north-central Europe especially increase the risks for warmer than normal temperatures even more, with heat building, a stronger risk of stronger height peaks, stronger spikes in heat from time to time. We're expecting a drier than normal summer across the northern half of Europe, but wet across the southwest, southeast, and areas surrounding the Mediterranean. But a lot of that is going to be rainfall. It's going to be delivered by the June precipitation. There's a sharp contrast in June between a very dry north and a very wet south. Signal is for dry weather for quite a large area of central, eastern, and north central Europe lingering through July, while western and northwestern Europe maybe start to become a bit more variable with the rainfall coming closer to seasonal for July. Of course, it's always possible to have very localized downpours, thunderstorms as well. At the same time, the wet weather should be easing across southern Europe. Rainfall amounts getting closer to seasonal in July and August. And then in August, west and northwest Europe look like turning wetter as we start to see more Atlantic low pressure systems becoming more active. Any ex-tropical systems or hurricane remnants getting mixed in would bump up rainfall as well. It's possible to say how likely that is at this stage, but it's certainly a possibility as we get into late summer. Some of the years similar to this one, in fact, had remnants of Atlantic hurricanes hitting the UK and Ireland. So let's have a quick look at the tropics and the hurricane season, which started officially on June 1st. El Nino tends to dampen down hurricane activity because it increases wind shear through the atmosphere over the Atlantic. But well, the warm North Atlantic Ocean have a say. Well, look back at 2022, we had 14 named storms, 8 hurricanes, 2 major hurricanes, and that's near average. And it was a rather slow start to the season. With La Nina in place last year, conditions should maybe have been more favorable, but some factors worked against development. For example, a lot of dry and dusty air blowing out of West Africa. The wind shear forecast from August to October shown here. That's the heart of the tropical season. It's looking unfavorable through the main development region. That's that area just north of the equator, from the west coast of Africa across to the middle of the Atlantic and towards the Caribbean. But signals are rather mixed. There's lower wind shear in parts of the Gulf of Mexico. On the left, the forecast of above average sea surface temperatures throughout the season, which ought to help development, but wind shear will tend to truncate it. So we have some tension between the warm seas and the destructive wind shear. Now, these are our analog years for tropical developments. That produces this map of cyclone slash hurricane track density. Notice the northern and eastern Gulf of Mexico are favored, the southeastern parts of the US, and there's a track of recurving storms offshore. That's the kind of storms we need to look out for, maybe having an influence late season on parts of Europe. So to summarize the tropical environment, El Nino is working against development while the warmth in the Atlantic is contrarily in favor. Wind shear is unfavorable in the main development region, but more favorable in the Gulf of Mexico and off the southeast coast of the US. The struggle is resolving these conflicting factors, but most likely from analogs, we will see a near average hurricane season, even slightly below perhaps, with a chance of at least 1 or 2 remnants recurving and impacting Europe with wind and rain as they get mixed up in mid-latitude low pressure systems. That's a threat that's more possible later from around August through October. And we've already seen that wetter outlook for Northwest Europe in August. Something else just to mention, in late summer, chance of medicanes. That's some Mediterranean cyclones, which have some tropical characteristics. So chances of those developing also in the Med as we get into late summer. So DTN's numbers are these. We're calling for 15 named storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes. To close out, a quick look at what the outlook is for renewables. No strong signals really for wind, but chances of some better wind in North Europe than the last couple of years. June has some brisk winds at times in England, Wales and the Low Countries with those persistent northeast flows, while southern Europe is rather calm And outside of any gustiness associated with thunderstorms, there's a low risk of any windstorms until we get to August, when those low pressure system should mean a general pickup overall in wind, at least across the UK and Ireland. Solar output doesn't have much confidence, but most likely near seasonal for many areas. Spain, Portugal, and the eastern and southeastern Europe look cloudier, mostly through June, when we're, of course, seeing those areas looking so wet. To wrap up, a quick glance at the global context. A lot of anomalous warmth shows up, probably not surprising, given a developing El Nino and the warm oceans. In fact, global oceans are currently, on average, the warmest on record. But what is also notable is how dry it's looking through the summer from India to much of China. So here are the key summer messages. Warm with some strong heat spikes possible, especially in the drier areas. Below average rainfall across northwest and North Europe, but becoming wetter in August. Possibly staying dry for longer in central northern Europe. Wet in the southwest, southern and southeastern Europe, especially through June and early July, with the rainfall easing through the rest of the summer. And tropical activity in the Atlantic should be near average. Here's the infographic breaking down the forecast. I'll leave that up for a few seconds. And now we'll discuss some of the implications for weather-sensitive industries. We're looking chiefly at aviation and events, so I'll bring in my colleagues Brad and Aryan.
All right, thanks. Thank you, Stephen. Welcome, everyone, to the Summer Outlook panel discussion. My name is Brad Nelson. I am a meteorologist and solution engineer at DTN, and you've already been introduced to Stephen, who gave us the terrific summer outlook for Europe and the UK. And we also have Aryan Peast, who is our aviation product manager at DTN. The main focus of the panel discussion here today, we're going to take about 15 minutes and talk through impacts on airport operations in particular, and outdoor events and festivals based on the information that Stephen has provided. So with that, Stephen, you brought up in the presentation that we're looking at, some higher confidence in a wet, potentially stormy summer across Southern Europe and especially Southeast Europe, and this wet weather shifting to Northwest Europe with potential for active storms, including the UK by late summer in particular, into August. We've already seen this occurring with some heavy rains, really devastating recent heavy rains in May across portions of northern Italy. So with this forecast, it really can be inferred, I would say, that there's an increased risk of thunderstorms with lightning, heavy rainfall, and gusty winds. Can you take a minute and just explain that forecast and your confidence in these kind of heavy rainfall events continuing in certain areas into the summer?
Yeah, sure. Well, we've seen this blocked pattern through June. High pressure at more northern latitudes that's been giving this dry weather across the northern half of Europe, which has driven low pressure systems further south than normal, across to the Mediterranean, particularly Spain, Portugal, and up there into the Alps. We've seen that flooding in Italy. It's taken a while for that to shift, so we'll see a continuation of that pattern into June for a while before it starts to break down, or mid-month for a while, and then more especially later in the month. And you mentioned thunderstorms and lightning risks. There's not a reliable way, particularly of predicting at seasonal ranges, whether or not there'll be more of these outbreaks than usual. Maybe it's obvious to say during summer months, especially with the warmth we're expecting, any unsettled conditions come with a relatively high risk of thunderstorms, but seasonal range is tough to pin down the other ingredients, such as the instability in the atmosphere. There's been a study that suggests actually a greater risks during La Nina than El Nino, but it's highly uncertain, and that's was really taking more into account the influence at southerly latitudes south of about 35 north, so isn't really so relevant as we head into Northern Europe. But it's a fair assumption, I think, that the greater amount and frequency of rain is going to mean greater thunderstorm chances, naturally. So for the rest of June and July, we're looking at more lightning threats across the southern half of Europe, localized torrential downpours with enhanced flood risks. Then for the more northern parts of Europe, the risk increases through the summer. August, as we saw, is looking wettest, especially in the northwest and Western Europe. But our analogues are showing elevated jet stream winds by then, along with above average moisture throughout the atmosphere. So that's conducive to thunderstorm activity. But even in July, there could be growing chances of troughs moving northwards into Northern Europe, bringing occasional strong convective outbreaks and hit and miss clusters of strong thunderstorms.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it kind of depends, like you said, how long these kind of blocking patterns stick around, and if we get in a more zonal pattern, which would negate some of the heavier rainfall sticking around in certain areas for longer periods of time. So with that, and as the busy holiday season comes around, there's a lot more people traveling to some of the major southern airports around the Mediterranean through the summer months. Arjen, next question for you is, what operational challenges do these airports have in preparing for adverse weather during their busy season, especially knowing that there may be an increased risk of rain and thunderstorm activity over the upcoming months?
Yeah, thank you very much, Brad, and thank you, Stephen, for that excellent outlook. Yeah, of course, if we look at the summer period in Europe, and we hear that, or we see in the model predictions that we anticipate more precipitation, especially in the south part of Europe, you're immediately thinking of more thunderstorm activity indeed. And with thunderstorm activity for airport operations and airline operations, I mean, yeah, lightning is of course one of the major issues. For example, aircraft handling will stop when they have thunderstorms overhead of the airport, which means that you probably can land your aircraft if the storm is not too close, but you will not get the passengers on and off the aircraft and the bags out of the aircraft. You can't refuel the aircraft, so that that adds all up. And you already mentioned that we're in June. We're already seeing a ramp up in travel from especially Northern Europe, Western Europe, towards the Mediterranean. It's the start of the holiday season, and especially now in this time of June, where we anticipate more precipitation in the more like the southwest part of southern Europe, so Spain, the Balearic Islands, and I'm like straight away thinking of airports like Barcelona, Palma de Mallorca, who are already pretty congested, and they already have challenges in the number of traffic. Good thunderstorm clusters will can have like a big impact on their operations. Aircraft will have to hold, they have to deviate, passengers stuck in the terminal. So that's something that airports and airlines should really prepare for. Airports should have to check if their adverse weather plans are dusted off, if their lightning detection systems are operating, make sure that everybody stays safe, that the procedures are in order for to secure ground surface equipment, that usually thunderstorms often go accompanied with severe wind gusts, all that kind of things going on. So yeah, it has a big impact, and of course airlines should be aware of this and make sure that when they create their flight plans towards that part of Europe, that they might take a little bit extra contingency fuel to be able to hold for a little bit longer than normal, or to deviate to an alternative airport. Yeah, it's unfortunately this type of weather usually has a big effect, and if that happens at a certain part of the day, you tend to have that snowball effect throughout the rest of the day and throughout the rest of the network. Those aircraft, that flight crew is not at the position where they should be, and that affects other airport operations. So that's how we see, especially in the summertime in Europe, when there's a lot of traffic going on towards the Mediterranean area. Yeah, that you have like a snowball effect in the European transport network for aviation.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for running through those challenges. A few things that you called out that I don't think many people actually think of. There's a lot of moving parts, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to this type of weather and how to prepare and mitigate for
Yeah.
it. But
I mean,
second question I have is like, how can professional weather solutions, tools, everything you have to help, manage these impacts to airport operations and other businesses? What is out there, including with DTN, in ways that we can help?
well, one part of that is, of course, knowing when to expect that impact. So, weather is one of the things in life that we cannot avoid, but we can prepare for impact of that. So we got really good tools like Aviation Century Online, Weather Century Online that can help you prepare for that. Make sure that you know when that adverse weather is coming, how severe that adverse weather is, how long does it take, and of course we have like yourself and our risk communicators that can take you along those events and make sure that you know when it comes and where it stops and when you can start your operations again.
Yeah, it's I like the segue that you have regarding our risk communicator team and our professional meteorologists that assist airport operations year round, not only during the summer months, but during those high impact, snow and ice events during the winter as well. So with that, I do want to kind of talk about some in the outdoor event space, the large outdoor events, the festivals that are going on, all summer long across Europe and the UK. We're looking at an active stormy season in certain areas. That could really lead to some big problems. There's a lot more accountability now, a lot more pressure for event and festival organizers to take this into account when preparing their safety plans, much like airport operations. Especially how to handle large scale evacuations, having enough staff for crowd management and communications, ensuring alternate scheduling plans are in place that are solid and well thought out. And Stephen, you also mentioned the outlook that generally most of Europe can expect to see widely warmer than average temperatures. We've seen this over the last few years with record heat. So is that correct? Are you pretty highly confident on expecting to see warmer than average conditions across most of Europe this summer?
Yeah, confidence is, I would say, higher than usual on that warmth, but especially across Northern Europe for the first half of summer at least, before we get into July and August. A lot of dry weather around, having to encourage that heat, which in some ways is good news for events and festival goers, but the flip side is that you get strong, sometimes dangerous heat on top of that. But it does look like most of Europe is going to have another warmer than average summer, except as we saw Eastern Europe, and especially across western parts of the continent. It's broadly consistent across the models, aside from a few discrepancies, Northern Scandinavia, Eastern Europe, for example, and supported by the analogs as well, with El Nino and the warm Atlantic helping to drive these above average temperatures. Long-term trends also are pointing towards above average month. And what's interesting is that even our cooler alternative scenario still indicates above average temperatures, not being the cooler scenario, not as anomalous, but still above average. So I think that's quite significant and leads us towards this higher confidence. In fact, if anything, the risk is more on the warmer side compared with what we're showing at the moment. If, for example, El Nino strengthens more or does so more quickly. On the other hand, it's a lower chance that the El Nino doesn't pick up as strongly. That would mean less warmth, but that's less likely, and we certainly wouldn't be looking at a cool summer in any case. So not only are we looking warm overall, as the underlying pattern, you can get these spikes in heat, taking temperatures to extreme levels for a few days at a time, and that can become more of a threat in places that are already dry. We've got less of the sun's energy going into drying out the ground and more into heating it. But whether we'll see the extent or frequency of 2022's summer heat waves is a bit of a matter of conjecture at the moment.
Well, heat is one of nature's greatest killers. Actually, can have more significant impacts on outdoor festivals and events, many times even greater than severe thunderstorms and heavy rain. And that's where experts like yourself, Stephen, and our risk communicator team step in and help. We can offer, weekly seasonal outlooks to help you prepare. If we see something 10, 15, 20 days out, we see a potentially very hot pattern for the time period that you're having your outdoor event, you can help mitigate those, those heat threats leading up to and then during the festival. So that's where I think, fully understanding large outdoor events operational challenges is so important, and that's where our risk communicator team steps in, provides full periods of support during the inclement, challenging weather. We have found that our customer partners value having one or two meteorologists they're working with that understand their operations, working with them through every significant weather event, and providing valued consultation. Really allows the event organizers, the safety managers on site, to be more prepared and respond accordingly to these weather conditions. They got a lot of other stuff going on that, weather sometimes is more of a secondary concern, and that's where we come in to help bring those actionable insights through our consultation. So it's really that holistic experience. We start with a workshop, we identify the challenges, the weather thresholds that you're looking for. If you have wind thresholds for your tents, or heat thresholds where you need to bring in cold towels or add extra water and concessions, and all those key decisions that need to be made. We then provide that dedicated proactive support during inclement weather during the event days, and especially when we have weather reaching those thresholds. And then we can follow up with risk assessments and post-storm reports as needed. So I wanted to touch on our risk communicator service. It helps our partners in the event space and airport operations save money, time, efforts, and allows for increased safety measures and efficiencies. So with that, I believe we're at time. So I wanted to touch base with Andrea here. Do we have any questions, other additional questions for either myself, Stephen, or Aryan at this point?
I do not see any questions at this point.
Right, sounds good. And for everybody on the call and listening to this recording after the session, feel free to reach out at any time, and we will get any additional questions answered, as soon as possible as we receive those. So great. With that, thank you everyone for listening in. I appreciate you, Stephen and Aryan, again for providing your professional, valuable input. And I hope everyone has a great day and an overall great summer. Thank you.
Thank you, and
Right.
have a great
Thanks,
summer,
everybody.
everyone. Thank you.
Have a great summer.
Thank you.